What's up, guys? Welcome to Writers at Work Compo Clinic, and today I am going to take you through the sticky question of how do I write good composition conclusions? Now, when you're writing good composition conclusions, I would argue that ending your composition is probably a bit more important than how you started. It's the last thing that your teacher is going to read. So you're going to want to make sure that whatever you put into your composition, you end well. You start well, you end well. If you kind of make a few mistakes in the middle, it's not that bad. So let's talk about our endings. Now, there's two things you want to focus on when you are working on your ending. First, you need to decide based on your plot what exactly needs to go into your ending. And that would depend on what your character needs to do, get, and feel. Now, I can't really prescribe what is supposed to go into your ending because these things will change depending on what goes on in your plot. But in general, you want to look for the following things. First, your character is going to have to do certain things in order to wrap up the story. So what actions does your character have to do to resolve whatever went wrong in the story? This can appear in a myriad of ways, but in general, these are the more common things that your characters will need to do based on problems that you can put into a PSLE composition time frame. So these actions being, depending on what happens, your character might be wronged in some way and thus need to forgive somebody. They may have to apologize for something or confess to a wrongdoing. If someone has done something good to them, they're going to need to thank that person. If something's broken, they're going to have to fix it. And in certain situations, the stories that you write might not be able to be resolved by children or your main character, who in most cases is a child. In which case, you're going to need to bring in an adult helper, someone, anyone, a police officer, a parent, usually a passerby. Now, when you have all of these endings, your character's situation is thus resolved. And so you're going to need to move on to get some personal resolution for your character. Not situational now, personal. In which case, you need to ask, based on what has happened in the story, what are the consequences that your character is going to face due to the actions of whatever's gone on in the plot? These consequences can range from, but of course not only limited to, praises. Good deeds usually are followed by very typical sets of responses in your conclusions. You have praises. The main character who did the good deed is going to be thanked and rewarded. Or if the story involves a misdeed or something bad that the character has done or caused, usually there's some form of reprimand or a scolding by a person in power. The main character might be punished in some way. Or if any injuries are there, you really want to have injuries or large scenarios being resolved and tended or treated to by an adult helper. Try to avoid writing endings where your main character, who's in primary 6, somehow knows how to patch up a broken bone. It might happen in real life, but it's a bit more difficult to convey to the reader that your character is capable enough at age 12 to tend to broken bones in that manner. So that's going to need a bit more setup. In general, we try not to. Now that your character has settled the consequences and has had the problem resolved, your character is going to now need to internalize what has gone on. In this case, you will need to figure out what your character feels. Now, this is interesting because it really changes depending on your character. If your character is callous, as in uncaring, or if your character is really kind and definitely emotionally affected, this is where your character's personality and morals will be shown. Your character might not necessarily be sorry for what they've done, in which case it will paint a certain personality for the reader and honestly affect the way a teacher associates and likes your character. It's easier to write about characters that your teacher likes. It's a lot easier for the teacher to connect. So, to show your character's morality at the end of the story, you're going to need to figure out the following emotions and what your character may think or do because of them. The first thing you want to usually put at the end of a story is the sense of relief. Something bad has happened, problem is resolved. Consequences have been dealt, and now everything is kind of, okay, we're at the end, we're at the null point, we're back to normal. Depending on the situation, someone somewhere may express remorse or may hear remorse expressed to them. Good deeds are usually associated with the person demonstrating a sense of pride There's definitely going to be shame, depending, of course, the opposite of pride is shame. So depending on what happens in the story, your character might choose to present one of these two. Your character might have had something happen to themselves or someone else whom they care for, in which case they would have hopes for this person. Maybe they hope the robber would turn over a new leaf. Or a lesson for the future. They're definitely not going to walk down that particular path because they now know that it is dangerous. These will then lend themselves to the basic elements of the next thing you have to consider. So you know what your character has to do, what your character has to get, and what your character has to feel. The next thing you want to ask yourself is, what tone do I want to set for my last paragraph? These can usually fall under 4 different types of composition conclusions. Now think of these as moods that you wish to put forth, depending on the type of story you've written. They can be presented in 4 different modes. The first being the tearjerker. Then you have the lesson learned, which is probably the one we're most familiar with. The all is well ending and the twisted ending. Some of these are more related than others, but I'll take us down in no particular order. So the first, the tearjerker. Tearjerkers are usually for some form of sad or bittersweet ending, and the whole point of the tearjerker is whether you are able to evoke an emotional response from the reader. Sometimes easier said than done, depending on what story you have particularly chosen, but some themes lend themselves really well to tearjerkers. You have those drama stories, you have stories associated with the elderly, for example, or abuse, or something on the sorts. So let's take a look at this example that I've got here. This story is about an elderly lady who was abused by her daughter, not verbally abused by her daughter, and thus she went through the entire story reacting to this abuse in a very troubling way. So the story is being told in this case in the first person perspective by the main character who rescues the old lady from the abuse. Now that's the scenario. Within this ending, you will see that the do, get, and feel elements are all in here, but they're presented in a particular tone to it. And the whole point, of course, is to get the teacher to feel something. So this is what the author has written. Auntie May was inconsolable, and hot tears rained down her weathered face. She was crying uncontrollably, rebuking us for saving her. The male teacher consoled Auntie May while keeping an eye on her. My head was throbbing as thoughts lingered on Auntie May's piteous plight. I looked at my mother, Auntie May's pain reflecting on her face in my mind's eye. The world wavered as tears filled my eyes at the thought of my own ungrateful deeds. That day, I swore I would always be filial to my parents. As you can see, this particular ending has lots of emotive expressions. There's a lot of descriptions of emotions. They didn't come right out and say, oh, I am sad, or, oh, I regret what I've done. Instead, they've used the physical responses to the emotions to demonstrate the elements of regret, of future learning, for example, as well as the consequences in this case. So here, all 3 elements are there, but the mood is, well, you don't walk away from this kind of a story being happy. It's something that brings you down, and it leaves the reader in a down state, which is what you want. So this is an example of a tearjerker ending. I'm not saying you actually make your teacher cry. That's quite hard. They're teachers. They're used to not crying over stuff that you write. So you want to just get them to feel something, feel down at the end of it. So this is an ending that leaves your reader feeling down if that is what your story intends. Now, on the opposite side, you have the different kind of ending, the all is well ending. Now, this one here leaves your reader to the beginning, in a way. For this one, you end up having a character resolving all the conflict in the story, but the characters end up the same as when they began. So they went through a series of events, and what happens is, at the end, their initial ideas and thoughts are confirmed by the end of the story. All's well that ends well. So let's take a look at this example. In this particular story, you'll see a younger brother is incredibly annoyed by an extremely exuberant little sister who's running around and making a fool of herself, and thus older brother, being responsible, has to deal with the looks that people are giving him because his sister is kind of misbehaving in the train in public. So in this scenario here, the sister has decided to run around, but not realizing that her clothing is she has a wardrobe malfunction, which leaves her underwear exposed. And despite her brother trying to call her back, or her brother actually didn't realize this, she had run off despite her brother's urgings to return. And it was an elderly man whom the brother thought, is up to no good, staring at the sister. It was actually an elderly man who quietly came up and told the little girl, you may want to check your skirt. So here, the brother begins the story being responsible. And this is what happens at the end. So let's take a look at this one here. It ends with the sister saying, "You're right. It would have been a greater embarrassment if I still had not known that the whole world could see my underwear," she muttered. At that moment, I knew that no matter how annoying my sister was, I would still love her. I would never forget that considerate old man sitting on the reserved seat. Truly, it is important to rise to the occasion and be kind and considerate to everyone around us. So in this ending, we see the do, get, feel elements are also reflected here. However, the author writes that he would still love his sister. That means he started the story loving the sister, he ends the story loving the sister, and the events within the story confirmed what he has felt. So he has maintained his state of mind towards the end. So this is the all's well that ends well ending. On the flip side, you have the other kind of ending, the one that we're most familiar with, but is the ending that needs a bit more work to spice up, because teachers read about this ending a lot. It's related to the all's well that ends well ending. However, in this case, yes, conflict is resolved, but the character ends up different from where they were when they began. So in this example here, this story is a boy has woken up really late. So this main character, Dylan, has woken up really, really late, and he begins the day with, whatever, punctuality. He's not really interested in all that kind of stuff, except because of his lack of care in being punctual, it creates this series of unfortunate events that winds up with him falling down in the bus and ripping his pants and exposing, his underwear. Okay, listen, not every story I talk about has underwear. It's just that these two particular, we're talking about underwear, okay? So anyway, let's take a look at this example that I've got here. The outburst of giggles and laughter and gushes of mockery filled the bus. Everyone was having a field day at his expense. Gathering what was left of his dignity, Dylan crawled to his feet, walking sideways like a crab on the bus to an empty seat. The poor boy kept his head low to hide his embarrassment. Bracing himself for the most humiliating bus ride of his life, he knew that he was the butt, of everyone's joke. The domino effect of his bad decisions had taught him a harsh lesson on improving his punctuality henceforth. Okay, so as you can see here, in the previous example that I've given you, the author used words like still to show that whatever the character felt at the beginning is now reinforced at the end. Here, the author changes the words a little bit to show that the character has learned. What he thought of in the beginning now no longer applies because, events eventuated. So in this case, the author used words such as henceforth or taught a harsh lesson on improving punctuality. These sort of words will suggest to the reader that the character's perspective has changed. Some kids tend to use once bitten, twice shy. These are fantastic, but they're also quite common. So if you do want to try to use them, you're going to have to put a spin on some of these common phrases that you wish to apply. As in this case, the butt of the joke. Underwear, but okay, I don't need to paint any pictures for you. So that's where we'll end. So this is the lesson learned ending. It's got a tone that can change depending on the lesson that has been learned. This one is a bit of a humorous story, so the tone ends up very light. The previous one, all's well, the tone is a bit more thoughtful because he realizes, yes, I do need to be, rise to the occasion. And the first one was just a real downer. Oh, everybody's sad. I'm sad. You're sad. Mom's sad. Now, the last one can be, honestly, whatever tone you want. It is the twisted ending. It is the ending where your character winds up different from the start, but in a way that they most likely find very, very unexpected. So, here, a word of warning before you use this particular ending. You do need to make sure that whatever elements you put in are set up in the story. So in this one here, this example I'm going to give you is a story about a boy with a crush. Okay? Don't say ew, it happens. Now in this case, the object of his affection, this girl named Chloe, has somehow wound up with her jacket. In this case, it's a jacket. It can be anything. A jacket up a tree. And him being the knight in shining armor, she doesn't know that he has, you know, a bit of an infatuation for her. And she's just upset that the jacket's up there. So he comes in quietly, you know, all right, I'm just going to try and help her out. And he climbs up the tree. But then, oh gosh, he grabs the jacket and snap. Let's see where this ends. Snap! The weak little branch that I had been stepping on snapped into two. Hugging the precious jacket, I rolled down the huge rain tree, falling onto Chloe. We landed on the soft green grass unscathed. I stood up quickly and rushed to help Chloe to her feet. I mean, yeah, he nearly squashed the object of his affection. I sheepishly handed Chloe her jacket. She thanked me generously and, to my utter surprise, gave me a quick kiss on my cheek. That was all I needed for my chivalry. I beamed from ear to ear and flitted home feeling all woozy. So much for being a knight in shining armor. Yeah, you can write stories like this. It's totally fine. I mean, change the names. So in this scenario here, she thanked the character, for being generous and in a way that surprised him because in the start of the story, she did not show any return for his affection. Neither did he reveal anything to her. But within his thoughts, he knew or he was already expressing internally that he did feel for her. So at the end, with that setup, the fact that she gave him a little peck on the cheek just made his day and changed his life, and now he's gone home completely happy. But it wasn't something the character expected. He didn't climb the tree thinking, oh yeah, maybe I'll fall on her and then she'll give me a kiss. No, that wasn't the aim. So this is an example of the twist ending, an ending where your character gets something unexpected and something surprising. So with these two steps, deciding what elements go into your ending, what your character has to do, get, or feel, and deciding the tone of your ending, whether you want it to be down and thoughtful, whether you want it to be up and uplifting, or even humorous in this case, those elements that you put in, do, get, feel, will then be changed and manipulated to fit the type of ending that you want. Now, of course, the only way you'll know what kind of ending you want is by planning your story. So don't jump in expecting your last paragraph to be magical just because you watched this video. It doesn't work that way. So start well, end well, and hopefully in between it doesn't go that wrong. And with that, thanks for watching Compo Clinic. We'll be back with another episode one day. That's all. Time for me to end my video. Not so well. Bye!